الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. إن الله تعالى يقول في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. وقال الله تبارك وتعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. Alhamdulillah, we praise Allah, we seek His aid, and we seek His forgiveness. We seek refuge in Allah from the evil of ourselves and the evil of our deeds. Whomsoever Allah guides, none can misguide, and whomsoever Allah allows to be led astray, none can guide. And I bear witness that there is no one worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the exalted, and that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is his messenger and slave. O you who believe, fear Allah and die except not in a state of submission. O humanity, fear your Lord who created you from a single soul, and from that created its mate, and from that scatters many men and women. Inshallah, today we'll be talking about the effects of sins, both the apparent and unapparent effects of sins. The things that immediately after committing a sin you can notice, and the things that you can't immediately notice, but most certainly will take place. And it's important that we know the effects of sins for many reasons, and one of them being to prevent us from doing sins. It is the nature of the dunya that each and every sin is sought out. As Imam Ghazali once said, there is nothing that is haram or forbidden except that it is desired. And you can notice that pretty easily, that haram is alcohol, right? And how many people enjoy alcohol? Zina is haram, and how many people enjoy zina? Riba is haram, and how many people deal with riba, interest? All these haram things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made them haram. They are pleasant, right? There is some sort of immediate pleasure that is achieved, right? And it is from the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has made these things haram, because sometimes we can't really see the harm in these things immediately. One might say, when looking at a certain sin, oh, I'll do it once, right, and I'll stop after that. Let me just try it once, and I'll never do it again. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made these things haram for a reason, right? Because He is Al-Alim, and He is the most knowledgeable. So the things that are dangerous to us and to the states of our hearts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of them. And Allah knows exactly what is good for us and exactly what is bad for us. But sometimes we get full of ourselves thinking we know more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And that His wisdom is not greater than our wisdom. A'udhu billah. We seek refuge in Allah from that. But the reality is, anytime we engage in some sort of sin, subconsciously we are telling ourselves that what we know is greater than what Allah knows. Right? And the truth is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows more than anyone and everyone. The punishment of Jahannam is not the only punishment for sins. Right? And many other effects of sins are in fact great enough to where simply that should be enough for you to avoid the sin altogether. And one of these things that I'll be mentioning are a spot on the heart, a seal over the heart. Right? And sometimes you might wonder why we sit down and listen to a lecture or we listen to Quran and it has no effect on our heart. And the reality is because the sins we have committed in the past have placed a seal over our hearts. So many black spots on our hearts that the light of knowledge is unable to enter. And only through seeking the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and through constant repentance, we may cleanse our hearts and allow the light of knowledge to enter our hearts, to find pleasure in our prayer and in our dua and in our fasting and in our zakah. We must cleanse our hearts. We must avoid sins if we want to enjoy the sweetness of Iman. Another effect of sinning is that it increases the distance between one and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we have ever wondered in the past why we feel so far from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why you feel like you could have a better relationship and a closer relationship to your Lord, it is likely because you're constantly sinning. We must be always aware of the traps of shaitan. Shaitan works in steps. He will bring you closer and closer and closer towards the sin until you can't leave. And that is from the traps of shaitan. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us against this. Right? He doesn't tell us simply to leave the sin once you're engaged in the sin. He tells us, لا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان. Do not follow the footsteps of shaitan, because that's how shaitan is. Shaitan sort of has this wisdom. Shaitan has been doing his work since the beginning of Adam. Since the beginning of Adam. And so he has experience. He knows what it is we seek, what we desire. And so we must be aware of shaitan and his tricks. A Sufi once said, a mystic once said, a glass that I drink from out of pleasure, and another I drink as a remedy from the first. And he says this when it comes to, in regards to sinning. And that is the nature of sins. That you do it once, and you think that, khalas, you're done. You're no longer going to desire that sin. But the reality is, the second time is more desirable than the first. And the third time is more desirable than the second. So don't fall into the trap of shaitan where he tells you to do this certain bad thing. To do this haram thing one time and you'll be done with it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the exact opposite. And by sinning we decrease our status in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We decrease our status in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know from the famous hadith that when sitting in a gathering of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that each and every one of our names are mentioned in the gathering of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala amongst the angels. Amongst the angels, name by name. And so we know that we live our lives over here, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is remembering us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching over us. And the angels are seeking forgiveness for us. The angels seek forgiveness for the believers. And when we sin, we decrease our status in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And so all these things are happening at the time of sinning. You're putting a seal over your heart. You're distancing yourself from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're decreasing your status in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So many things that if we were to never hear of them, we would be completely unaware of them. And it's important that we constantly think over these things, right? I'm sure none of us here want to be far from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nor do we want to experience the punishment of Jahannam. But the reality is, if we don't constantly think over the punishment of Jahannam, the blazing fire of Jahannam, then there's nothing to stop us from doing these sins, right? Our desire for sins will always remain so long as we are human. And so, I'll end the first part of the khutbah with that it's very important that we remember the effects of sins before and during the time of sinning, right? And especially after, when we are making tawbah, right? Because if we don't, then we will have no motivation to seek out the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It will seem as if it is illogical almost. So know that Jahannam is for the disbelievers and for the sinners, and for those who don't seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But for those, Jahannam is for those who do seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه ولسائر المسلمين. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. And so we talked about the numerous effects of sinning and the effects that a sin might have on your heart and your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think it's important to mention that it's not unnatural for humans to sin. We are all the children of Adam. And it is only reserved for the prophets that they are free from sin. Each and every human being is prone to commit a sin, to fall into sin, to fall into the traps of shaitan. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't tell us that Jannah is for the ones who don't sin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us Jannah is for those who sin and after sinning seek forgiveness from Him. They recognize their weakness. They recognize their weakness and the desire they have for certain things. But they also understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who may forgive them for what they do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who may judge them for what they do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who may grant one Jannah or punish one with Jahannam. Or may punish one with Jahannam. So we remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching over us. And we remember that the doors of forgiveness are left open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Right? We must never ever doubt that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive us. As long as our repentance is sincere and we are living, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bi'idhnillah ta'ala will forgive us. As long as we are sincere. And so long as we are not dead and we have not transferred over to the next life, we are able to seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's important we take advantage of this opportunity, because once it's gone, there's no going back. That is when the feeling of regret, of ultimate regret, a type of regret greater than any regret, will be experienced. Right? Once you pass away and you realize you can no longer seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and whatever you have done in the past, you will be held accountable for, whatever good and whatever bad. Not simply with some small punishment, but with the punishment of Jahannam, and you will be rewarded with not some small reward, but with the eternal reward of Jannah. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us from those who seek His repentance often. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects us from sin, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask from Him that He make us conscious of Him at all times. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala returns us to Him in a time in which we are close to Him, in a time in which we have the strongest type of faith. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة